Hi guys, we are going to start the progressive era. And now progressive era is one of those things. What is progress? What does progress mean? A lot of times we have progressivism today, right? That's a kind of a buzzword that we have, and simply buzzwords are just words that we use a lot, like systemic. What does systemic actually mean? All right, and so one of the things about any language is that you have to really go into depth with what is the wording mean? What does the language mean? What is the underlying reason for the word, right? So progressive, obviously the root word is progress. And for some, progress is all about economy. Some it's about social change. For some, it's about reforms in this or that labor or social aspects. And you're true. You're right. It's all of those. So you need to understand that when we talk about the progressive reforms of the 1900s, the early 1900s, you've got a lot to be at stake here. You've got the labor unions. You've got immigration reform. You've got social reforms, even dealing with racism. We've talked about that before with the immigration and urbanization. You're dealing with police reforms and how things work in the political field of immigrants being used as maybe ways in which the politics worked and how people were being used and abused. You even have reforms, obviously voting. You've got the voting reforms that come about during this time. For women, and then you also have food and drug reforms, cosmetics. So anything and everything was reformed during this time, and it was billed as progress. And what does that actually entail? So here we go. We've got our progressive era presentation. We're just going to hit through the highlights of this. You will watch this one, as part of your stuff that you're going to be doing for your education stuff. But I want to just hit through some of the highlights are here. This first part of this reform was what we call the populist reform, and these are reforms that were made within usually the Midwest era, and you can kind of see this guy right here. This is William Jennings Bryant, and we haven't really talked about a lot about him. We will, but he is talking about the reforms against the Democratic Party because the Democratic Party were having some issues. Now remember, I know I'm going to keep pointing this out. At the time, the Democratic Party were the party of the South and also the party that was a lot racist, okay, and they were the ones that were against giving people the vote, and so the populist movement, especially in the Midwest portion, dealt with stuff that was focusing on issues dealing with economy, dealing with agriculture, dealing with moving the trains because the big part of the railroad system was owned by banks and all that kind of stuff. So they had a populist party that came along, and remember, history is cyclical. It goes in circles that we'll see some of the same thing come around again. Even today, we're dealing with some of the same types of things, same types of feelings that are big part of that. All right, so the farmers during the late 1800s, right? You got issues with the prices for crops were falling. Farmers were mortgaging their farms because they needed to buy more land in order to have all the land to grow stuff, but then that was putting them in debt, and their debt was being held by the banks. You've got this out of the Civil War era. You got this money system that is changed, so you're no longer on the greenbacks. What is it about gold? All that kind of stuff, right? So banks foreclosed on paid mortgages. Railroads took advantage of this because they were in cahoots with the banks. United States issues that paper money, and they say, wait a second, how do we pay this back? We borrowed it in this currency, but you want us to pay it back in this currency, which is actually costing more, which inflation rates go up, all that kind of stuff, right? So this image is these monopolies. Remember, we've talked about monopolies and this whole idea of okay, we'll give you this, but we want your vote, right? And so there's a group of people that get together, and this is called the Farmers Alliance. And this Farmers Alliance was it first started with the patrons of husbandry, right? Or you can look at this date here, 1867, right after that Civil War time period, okay? And this later on kind of morphed into what we call the Grange. And this was a idea that we were bringing farmers together, and we are trying to basically boycott the grouping of railroads and banks, and we're fighting the railroads. Well, that was great, but there was actually more to the issue, right? But they did bring out what we call Granger laws, and they got together, they worked together to form some laws, or put into law some very important parts of the system here, right? So you got a couple of court cases that come around, upheld the rights of states to regulate the railroads. Then you've got the state laws regulating interstate railroad rates, so all across the country. And then you got the ICC, which is the Interstate Commerce. Now, the problem with this ICC is there was no way really to enforce the laws. If they found somebody had violated these laws, what did you do? There was no teeth. There's no actual, here's how we're going to figure this out. All right. So now you have the growth or the movement of a populist group. All right. And we've seen this throughout history. If you are a student of history, you'll see different movements have, they get political power. All right. And they wanted to focus on the people's movement, and sometimes we call this the Omaha platform. And this Omaha platform, you might hear it come up again in a test or so, but this was a platform is basically a statement of beliefs or statement of ideas that they want to follow, right? Every party has a platform. The Democratic Party has a platform of what their main core beliefs are. The Republican Party has a platform. We're right in the middle of the convention time period. Last week was the Democratic National Convention. This week is the Republican National Convention, and they put out what their party is for and stands for, and that's important, right? So you've got this populist party. They wanted to increase the money supply and bimetallism and free silver. We'll talk about that here in just a second because it's a fascinating topic. Women's suffrage. Yes, they are the ones that really pushed women's suffrage and the right to vote. This is in the Midwest, right? And so it gained a lot of traction and movement. Government regulation of railroads. The graduated income tax. Oh boy, that's a progressive income tax, and we will talk about that because that's a fascinating. Why does one group get to pay a certain amount of tax and one group gets to pay another amount of tax based on how much money they get? Is that fair? What is fair? All those kind of words come about during this time period, all right? And then you have one of the most interesting of this grouping is called the election of the U.S. Senators by popular vote, and it does eventually lead to the 17th Amendment. Now, I will say, it's one of those amendments that I actually disagree with. And you don't always hear Dr. Town talk about things that he disagrees with or doesn't think is good. I understand why they wanted it, but it actually, in my opinion, hurt a lot of the ways in which our country is run and the way that the government was originally set up to run and to get things done. So it's kind of interesting. It's a unique part, and we'll talk about why that's good and bad. Okay. All right. So Wizard of Oz. Wait a second. Wizard of Oz? Are you talking to me about Wizard of Oz in the middle of this whole populist movement? Yes, I am, because it is so much what we call an allegory, right? The book written by a guy named Frank Baum, and it was written to depict certain aspects of the political culture, right? And so the Wizard of Oz, O-Z, that's the two-letter designation for gold, right? And so it's kind of that's where gold comes from. You've got everything looking as green, and this is the Emerald City. The Emerald City is representative of Washington D.C. and the banks of the time period. Then you've got each of these characters that are representing different groups or people that's within it. So this is a video right here that actually talks about the real story of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. So I highly encourage you to watch this because it's a fascinating one that you have here. And this is actually a little bit of another video that talks about the commentary on that populist movement. So take a moment to watch it. We actually probably will watch it in one of our Zooms, but still go ahead and watch it. All right. So the Cowardly Lion in the Story of Oz. Oh, by the way, I'm going to put it back. The ruby slippers in the book were not ruby; they were silver, which brings us to the idea of the free silver movement, which is that we were a standard on gold, but this was actually hurting the farmers, the people that were part of that group. So you've got William Jennings Bryan, who is a guy that, you know, he ran for president several times. He lost every time, but he was very powerful in different groups. He was a very charismatic person, very spiritual. He's a Christian. He fought for different things. Matter of fact, one of the most memorable parts of what we have is called the "You shall not crucify on the cross of gold." We call this the cross of gold speech. But he also actually defended later on another battle, and this was talking about the monkey battle, right? The evolution battle that we'll discuss a little bit later on in the 1920s, talking about evolution being taught in the public school systems, and he was a part of that as well. So this is you know, Jennings Bryan. Remember, there is a lot of economic ups and downs in this time period, and this economic ups and downs were dealing with the panics and the different ways in which people were trying to have money to spend, and economic philosophies are a big part of that. All right, so we've got this progressive movement that really starts expanding. You've got social problems that are coming up. These are created by industrialization, urbanization, and immigration. Now, guys, understand, we talked about this before. The industrialization, the movement of new inventions and ideas, that leads to the people, immigration coming in, people trying to have jobs, find places to work, to live, all right? And then that also brings up the idea of urbanization and the struggles with urbanization, the housing, the food, the poor supplies that they're trying to, you know, deal with. And then of course that brings up new industrialization. So this is a big cycle that just keeps repeating itself. So make sure you understand that, because that will be on your test. Explain to me how the industrialization led to immigration, led to urbanization, which led to industrialization, all around again. Okay, and so you've got problems that come about, and you've got this middle class that comes being formed, but they're also dealing with these ideas. So you got a lot of progressive reforms that deal with political corruption, inadequate government services, unregulated big business, poverty, all the same things that we're dealing with, the same things today. Okay, then you've got muckrakers that they're raking up the muck. These are writers of articles, books, novels. These are the people that basically say, wait a second, let's figure this thing out. And they have an audience that they're allowed to just share their ideas with, right? And so that's really huge. Now, guys, listen. And I'm bringing this out today. These muckrakers were not popular, right? And they got a lot of people angry at them, especially political, you know, clout type of people. But they didn't care about this. They wanted to show the rest of the population what is going on. They use that fourth branch of government, and that fourth branch of government is supposed to be that one that keeps everybody in check, and we call that the journalists, right? The people that are the media. Let's just be honest, some of the media today is not necessarily being as unbiased, right? And it's on both sides, all sides, right? There's many sides. And we've talked about that before with the quality sources and looking at biases. Guys, no one is going to be completely unbiased. The muckrakers were not completely unbiased. They had a very biased view of the world around them, okay? But they at least tried to show by using pictures, by using words that very much brought about the idea of what's going on in the culture. Maybe you haven't heard about it, okay? So they were the social media of the time period. So just think about that. All right, so you got Lincoln Steffens. He was a focus on corrupt politicians. Jacob Riis was a photographer. I'll show you a couple pictures of him here in just a second. Ida Tarbell reported on the ruthless business practices of John Rockefeller, and he was ruthless. There was no doubt about it. But he actually respected her. Strangely enough, he wrote a lot about her and said, "Hey, she might be a bulldog. She'll sink her teeth into you, but she hangs on." And then Upton Sinclair is one of those writers that he wrote the book The Jungle. We'll talk about him more later on. Showed the poor working conditions of immigrants. Now, unfortunately, what a lot of people took from this was not about the immigration. That was what he really wanted to focus on. But he actually, they focused on, wait a second, this is about the poor food, the stuff that's being processed and horrible stuff. So here are some images of these guys. And I'm going to run through a couple more images. This is just a normal image of, kids playing on the street with a dead horse behind them. Wait, a dead horse? Yeah, a dead horse just in the street, flies everywhere, nastiness, and they haven't picked up. And obviously these little urchins, and I'm going to call them urchins because that's where they were. They're drinking some of the water that this stuff is running into is nasty stuff, right? Here are some of the images of the conditions that people lived in. This is a potbelly stove, and I know that many of you probably haven't ever seen one of these, but I actually grew up with a potbelly stove in my house way back in the woods, and this was very dangerous. It got very, very hot, and it caused a lot of fires. And of course, you can see all the amount of people that are in here and all their stuff. And then this is the video, the jungle. Please take a moment to watch this. It's pretty gross, I will say, but it's definitely worth watching, that you need to at least address. All right, so that is the start of the populist movement and the progressive era. Lots of moving pieces in this, and we'll talk more about how it got into the ideas of the government, because the government starts getting involved, because the people start voting in people that are supporting their ideas, right? And that's how government works. That's how our United States government works. If you don't like what this politician is doing, you have the opportunity to vote them out. Now, there's some other parts of that, whether or not they're giving you the full story, and that's the whole idea of the media, trying to give you the full story and let you decide, right? So that is our progressive era start, and we'll have two more of these lessons with the progressive era. All right, guys, have a good one.